Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Students Against Mandates podcast. I'm your host today, Sheldon Munroe. And today we have a very exciting reoccurring guest. So this is Dr. Frijters' second time on the show. And for all who may be unaware or who have first time being introduced to Dr. Frijters, he is a professor of wellbeing economics at the London School of Economics. He has completed his master's in econometrics at the University of Groningen. Hope that I'm pronouncing that right. He has a PhD from the University of Amsterdam. He is also engaged in teaching and research at the University of Melbourne, the Australian National University. Professor Frijters is a prominent research economist and has published over 150 papers in his fields, including unemployment policy, discrimination, and economic development. Paul has advised the UK government and others on how to implement well-being policy at the national and regional level, and now he's kind enough to join us and advise us in some sense. And so thank you, Dr. Frijters, and the sources from this biographical introduction are thanks to the Brownstone Institution and the London School of Economics, so we thank them. And so welcome, Doctor.
Great to see you, Sheldon, and welcome to all your viewers and brave students in Canada. Nice to see you all.
Wonderful, thank you. So, Doctor, we have a few exciting topics to discuss with you today, but particularly what's been really exciting from our side and in seeing your recent work is your new higher education academy called Nova Academia. I had a number of directions I was initially going to take this interview in, but by reading your articles and then diving into an understanding of this new higher learning academic center there, I see that your academy really is a key solution to many of the problems you've indicated in some of your prominent articles you've co-authored there on Brownstone Institute. So I see a real solution here, and in this solution, it's really somewhat addressing some of these problems. So maybe we'll start with just the 40,000 foot overview there, if you will, Doctor, and we can just get an understanding of what this new academy is, what its focus is going to be around, and perhaps why you saw this need to begin this endeavor.
Well, the need is to give young people like yourself, basically, right, a space to talk freely, to think critically, to sort of examine their own societies, but also how to be a community again. And so we are creating a campus environment in which there are both academic activities, whereby we go through, politics, philosophy, economics, health, statistics in order to understand this world, but also, midday activities. So diet, exercise, music, walks, right, languages, and sort of to expand ourselves in all kinds of ways. And so the idea is, yes, young people who particularly have sort of, been shook awake by the momentous events of the last 4 years and realize there is no going back, and that to a certain extent they must forge their own futures. That's what this initiative is for. And it's so to give them a community. Initially, we're going to start with 1-year programs, so they will start in September, but we'll have 1-week tryouts in June, July, August. So we call them boot camps. It's where you can sort of, try before you buy, experience it for a week. And when I say we are basically a bunch of concerned international academics, thinkers, and citizens from around the world, but with the gravity points in the Netherlands and Australia, who've sort of been very concerned at the way the world has gone. We've sort of been high-profile commenters and as it were, detractors of the official narratives, very much like all the other guests you've had. But indeed, as you say, we want to do something that's constructive, to sort of make a place where we ourselves want to live with our own families. I have a wife and 3 elderly children, so they're 28 to 21. That'd be ideal for this kind of endeavor as well. And we basically want to restart academia. And so it's very much oriented to students like yourself, your immediate organization, and as it were, the more go-forward listeners you have in Canada. The good news for Canadian students, which is not true, for instance, for American students, is that you can come to Belgium, so you can see the castle, down below here. You can see the castle down below here. That's where it is in the Ardennes in Belgium, and we have space for maybe 100 students. But Canadian students can come on a 1-year working holiday visa. That means they can actually attend this, whereas Americans can only come for 3 months. So I very much warmly invite all your listeners to sort of, go to, where is it? There it is. There it is. Novacat.org.
Yeah.
We already have a youth student society who make use of our sort of extensive network of international mentors. You can look online whom that is. That includes Jeffrey Tucker from Brownstone, includes Susie Foster, who is sort of a very prominent activist and professor of economics in Sydney, Australia. And it includes more than a dozen others, all kinds of political and religious persuasion. In that sense, we are a broad church. So that's our student organization. She is the main organizer of it, and a lot of the sort of youngsters you see there are sort of part of that endeavor. And there's a Discord group now and a WhatsApp group. So they're sort of getting going to organize all kinds of activities and basically free themselves of this, anti-mentality, whereby it's only one is against things, that they're sort of building their own lives, building their own future. And so this is very much built together with youth, right?
Yes, absolutely. Now, you made two really interesting points there. Number one, there's an array of academic fields in which it sounds like we're going to be the academic institution will be covering there. And also the location is quite interesting as well. It's in Belgium, and now Belgium is somewhat of a small country, but it's quite rich with culture and history and into art. And I'm wondering, this is quite interesting because it's in relation to one of the articles you had co-authored there, Vision for New Liberalism. You speak
Mhm.
about the importance of community engagement and recentering one's focus into contributing into a larger sphere of society, but through one's interaction with their own community. Now, do you feel that Belgium really, I would wonder here, is a particularly conducive place for this to inspire students in this respect?
I think it is, and particularly the area where we are in Belgium. So we're in the French-speaking part of Belgium, and hence the last couple of months, in order to sort of prepare for living there, I've done a lot of Duolingo. Comment ça va? As you will know, in Canada, there's a French-speaking part there as well. I'm not naturally French-speaking; I'm more Dutch English in terms of parentage. But they do still have quite strong communities in that part of Belgium, in sort of Wallon, Belgium. And so these are communities where people have lived together for many generations. They know each other well. And of course, we're a little bit outsiders, but they are used to people in these castles coming there and building up additional communities, for instance, for patients, or indeed for these kind of educational activities. And so in that sense, they're quite tolerant of that. And we're hoping to live together in a very harmonious way with the existing communities there. I will also say that this is a sort of a relatively new enterprise for me as well. I've intellectually realized we must go towards, as it were, smaller communities and feed into the wider communities, sort of the wider West, the Netherlands and the UK in my sense. My kids are Australian, so them too. And of course, Canada is part of this wider Western world. But one must have, as it were, a return to, as it were, clear communities whereby you have tight friendships, which we know for years, and a clear sense of us. Now that's new for me, of course, because I'm almost a poster child for globalism. I think this will be my sixth country that I live in for a while, right? But that's just what the last 4 years have taught us, right? I mean, globalism is not the way forward. One can be a traveler of the world, but there needs to be a sense of home and a sense of community, if only in an intellectual sense.
Yes, absolutely. You're completely right, and it's a really it sets a priority very clear, I think, for young individuals, as you wrote in one of your in this article, "Vision for New Liberalism." Really, it's actually would be suggested in the article. I know you co-fostered that with co-wrote that, pardon me, with Gigi Foster and Michael Baker, if I'm not mistaken, there. But actually, to be have full rights or full membership of a community, one is not just given such. It is actually part of, one would have to first contribute in a productive way to the community. So, which is interesting because you're really seeing this throughout your academy. This be put into place here, this training at least, this
Mhm.
initiation of such a contribution. So very interesting in that sense, and it's really puts the weight on the shoulders of responsibility of young individuals to first off go to the local town halls, make their voices heard, contribute, get involved with local community matters, in order to change things, which is quite doable, but it's also a very real responsibility we have. So, but another really interesting thing you mentioned, Professor, is not just that it's engaging with a small community. It's also that it's a smaller academic institution, which is quite interesting. Because recently, I mean, for myself, I've come from the University of Calgary, so it's a large university, and you feel like a very small fish in a very large pond. And it's easy to get lost in the institution, and you end up just vying for simply obtaining a piece of paper, uh, your accreditation and passing the test, the standardized test. So, what role do you think smaller academic institutions play in this vision for a new future, a new academic future? And what importance do you think they have?
Um, I think small academic communities are the way to go for several reasons. One is they're just much better, right?
Mhm.
So, sort of the famous universities of old, Oxford, Cambridge, and Harvard, when they were at their best, they were pretty small. They were not these sort of monoliths of, 40, 50,000 students that are now the universities which I've been part of for a large part of my life and which are now normal around the Western world.
Mhm.
No, I mean, for instance, Oxford was a town of no more than 10,000 for most of its history, right? And
Mhm.
that's including lots of different colleges.
Mhm.
So the more optimal size of colleges in which you can really help students develop their own minds and have personalized programs rather than these kind of very standardized, very bureaucratic, very atomistic, very sort of distance notion of, hamburger education that we have now,
Mhm.
right? The small communities are just much more powerful in
Mhm.
terms of really teaching people and letting them develop themselves and having real interactions. That just works much better. And so
Mhm.
one reason to go small is that just a much better model of education. And these large monoliths are sort of soulless, but they're also just low quality, right? They don't really
Mhm.
prepare you for life. They don't worry about you as an individual with, mental, spiritual, dietary needs, right? It's just sort of, okay, don't even bother coming, look online and show up for the exam. And off you go with a piece of paper, whilst not having learned to think critically, but rather sort of, become a mindless automaton, having had lots of propaganda stuffed down your throat. So
Yes.
what an awful way to live for
Mhm.
truly smart, ambitious, socially conscious people, right? You don't want that, right?
Yes.
And the second reason why I think small is the way to go is that if I think of, the communities of the future, they shouldn't be so huge, the nuclear communities. They should be small enough that at least a lot of the key people know each other and have this sense of pride and ownership of the community as a whole, look after it, if you like, right? That's got to be the basis of things. And that means we're not talking about, hundreds of millions propping people into these huge universities, but just much smaller ones. And
Mhm.
also, there are far too many, if I may say, there are far too many students who go to university. It shouldn't be half the population; it should be maybe 5% of the population, right? I mean, universities are now full of students who basically have no real business being there, and they didn't used to be enticed to go to university. That's become a business model.
Mhm.
But there's no point for society having that. And so what you see is that a large group of students basically are wasting a lot of money and time on university and then afterwards have no real benefit from it, right? Their wages, income, and career are not helped by it because that was never sort of, their real strength. I mean, universities in that sense only function if they are for a small percentage of the population.
Mhm.
And that is a reality, which, of course, for political and popular purposes, lots of university people and politicians don't like to say, but it's the truth. Half the
Yes.
population shouldn't spend 3 or 4 years after the age of 18 in universities. No, that's not efficient at all, right? A lot of
Yes.
people should be more in trades or should be in more, or should immediately be part of the workforce, right? This whole notion of everybody must have a piece of paper, that's not good for anybody in the longer run, right?
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
that's not what you want out of that. So that's another reason, right, to sort of go small.
Yes.
And a third reason, a very pragmatic reason, is that if you're in a situation where you're up against it, right, and I've realized that your organization too is sort of up against it. You have authority coming after you a little bit.
Mhm.
So wherever you are, they try and get at you with all kinds of mandates and difficulties with tax authorities or fire safety or whatever it may be. If that is the reality, it helps to be small because you can sort of pitch up and go elsewhere quickly. So you're less vulnerable to being shut down.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Well said. It's Interesting too. I mean, I want to touch on the fact that also as you say that, it pops into my mind that your academic institution there covers a wide array of subject matter and taught in far more close in environment with the educator. But what do you see as the beneficial aspect of having students be more well versed in an array of fields? I found that particularly in university, it was very segregated in the sense of maybe not necessarily intentionally based, but that students mostly stuck to their own field, and there was almost even in many times a communication barrier. Although two students might be talking about the same subject matter in the same intentional way of discussing an issue, but have a failure of actually being able to conductively uh, communicate issues. And so it felt like an array of education and understanding of another's field, or an array of field understanding is actually quite beneficial. Is that your thoughts as well?
Definitely. And Nova Academia will have some disciplinary focus, right?
Mhm.
I'm an economist and econometrician, and so there will be a school of economics.
Mhm.
Gigi Foster is also a strong part of that. Two of her kids are also involved in this, and you can see their pictures behind me. There's also a school of health, which will be about the renewal of public health. So, health as it's supposed to be taught, if you like, economics that's supposed to be taught.
Mhm.
But indeed, we are wide in the sense that we're interested in really fostering critical thinkers who use insights from wherever they can find it, who become able to sort of, distill knowledge from any person they meet, any book they read, any website they come across, and sort of build up their own worldview and sort of, grab from here and there
Mhm.
nuggets of knowledge, as it were, but really reflect on them, build them into their worldview. So let me illustrate how we're going to do this, right?
Mhm.
Because, as it were, the big modern universities can't teach in a personalized manner. They must, just out of sort of pragmatic purposes, must have an exam which is standardized. We don't need to do that. We can do that for a couple of things like statistics, which you teach, but we don't need to do that. So we're going to do two things. One is we call this the Jules Verne notes, which is used via Obsidian. It's sort of a reflective thing. And so the idea is that we sort of introduce you to lots of concepts during the week, and we make you reflect on it to make you apply them, right? And I will give you an example in a moment. But that students themselves write notes to themselves as to what they've really learned, right? What they now believe that they didn't believe beforehand. And that may be nothing. Maybe nothing has convinced them. Maybe nothing that they and as it were, their fellow colleagues at this college would have come up with as convinced. Well, okay, well then it's a blank note. But over time, they will start writing down things. Well, I now really believe this, right? And believing then means, okay, I'm going to base my own decisions on this. That's really believing something. That's really knowing something,
Mhm.
or at least
Mhm.
having a strong sense of, okay, this is knowledge. Um, and then, of course, this set of notes can be used to test you, not necessarily in a grading way, but just one of your friends at this academy, kind of months later, go through your notes and say, oh, well, okay, this idea you had on, okay, for you, death means that you can no longer interact with people for any length of time, you're not resurrectable. Well, that's very interesting, right?
Mhm.
But later on, we learned that every hospital measures death in a different way in our region. Have you reflected on that? Are the two commensurate? Have you thought about this? And so then you get a discussion between students based on their notes as to what they now believe, right? And so in that discussion, there's both a kind of a peer review, there's both a kind of an implicit grading going on, but there's also a mutual learning going on, right?
Mhm.
You get deeper insights both in that particular topic, then what does death actually mean and how is it actually measured, right? By hospitals and medics. And you will find that in reality, it's measured in very different ways across countries because it's not an easy thing to define.
Mhm.
And so that's the Jules Verne method, right? And after a couple of months, of course, the academics can look at the same notes again and also have a discussion and sort of see, okay, have you really reflected? Are you developing your own thoughts? Are you taking in insights on what the other students are looking at, right?
Yes.
Um, and so that's one method, right? And that's a very powerful method by which we can get individualized learning. It's impossible for a large university, but very easy for a small academy, right?
Mhm.
And there's a
Mhm.
second thing we do, which you touched upon before, which is that we want our students to be useful for their own community.
Mhm.
And so that means it's not just about, okay, here's a set of skills in the community and this is all the wonderful things we give you as a student. No, we also want those students to, as it were, produce things that they are good at producing, because of course these are smart kids, these are people with heart for their own society, and they can help their own communities by figuring out, okay, how to improve their own communities, right? Because we're going to teach them to be system thinkers, to sort of have a wide view of their country, their world, in economics or economic sectors, and health, so in health sectors and sort of health policy, but also health habits. And then we want them to give back. And one way to give back whilst teaching is that in economics, we're going to want them to, as a collective, write a book on the various sectors of the local economy and say, well, okay, this is going well, that's not going well, not going well in the sense of world practice is better, and this is how it's done elsewhere, or this is how it's done 5 years ago. And so, okay, well, what would we gain as a society if we go to world best? And how can we get to world best? What are the institutions that sustain that? Maybe we need democratic reforms. Maybe we need a different form of regulation. Maybe we need to set up startups. Maybe we need to get rid of some regulation. Whatever it is, that will then be something that students discover, and that's something that they're then uniquely good at, because you need quite a bit of sort of broad understanding. You need insights from many different areas to sort of come to such an ability to say, look, this is better, and that's how we're going to be able to get there, right? Where one is going to be an architect of one's own society. And in that way, students give back whilst learning about the system, right? And that too, of course, is individualized, because different groups of students will pick a different sector of the economy or a different particular health issue, right? Some may go for diet, others may go for exercise, others may go for genetic medicine, others may go for gender reassignment purposes, as it were, and sort of investigate that. Is this world best? What would world best be? How do we get there? And so in that sense, we want to make use of these students for their own society, but of course also something that gives them a product to show to potential employers and their own families. Look, mom, dad, this is what I've done with this year.
And what I love about that too is there was a point brought up in one of your articles that in the Vision for a New Liberalism, which has just kept in my mind, because I had written papers on how I best thought to address this issue, and that's of bureaucracy, of course, and it was very much an issue in history and political science and in law and society in my fields, and seeing that this was somewhat of an issue. And unfortunately, in hindsight, I think I had quite pessimistic outlooks as to and even perhaps lacking in solutions as to regarding how to best solve an issue where we seem to have for example, in the university system, many administrators in comparison to a ratio of administrators to students. And so I was seeing this was somewhat of an issue, and we had a bit of a bureaucratic issue. What I loved in that article, A Vision for New Liberalism, is it didn't discount bureaucracy being a key component in our future. No, it actually is accepting of bureaucracy, but it's just how we deal with it and how we're involved in it. If we become bureaucrats ourselves, how to best manage this. And so what I really like about the academy, as it sounds like, is that this is very much in line with having young students be directly involved with understanding what our local sectors of our economies and societies are doing, and therefore really be able to play a role in dealing with that issue in some sense. Do you feel the same in that way?
Absolutely. You've really well understood what our hope for this is, right? So we very much sort of are trying to have a balancing act in this academy. Right? One is, as it were, the needs that we see for Western society, and the other is, of course, the direct needs of the students. Right? So Western society needs people who understand the system and who can be architects of the future, right? Who sort of understand it enough, but also understand democratic principles, team organization, all kinds of sort of tricks by which groups can figure out what goes on and sort of orient themselves towards a better future. That's what society needs. Society needs these system thinkers to understand, come up with solutions, try and implement them through the institutions, and indeed reform the state, right? I don't see a realistic future in which there is no state. I mean, the state has been dominant for the last 500 years. We need them to sort of fend off the armies of other countries, and we need them to keep the large international corporations in line. So there's no future without a state. It's more rescuing the state from what it's now become and making it better again, right? And that must happen initially, of course, from outside the state. But
Mm-hmm.
the state cannot be our enemy. The state must be reformed and be, as we're brought back into the social fold, if you like, right? Society must rescue the state. That's now the nature of the place. Even though the
Yes.
state may behave like our enemy, we must rescue it. Right? That's sort of the reality, I feel. But
Yes.
that's the need of society because students, they're young people. They have their own lives to think about. They too, must one day have kids and mortgage and all that sort of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all very fair. When I was a young student, I was ambitious and I wanted to win, and I make no excuses for that. It's the nature of the beast. And so we must also give students something that is directly beneficial to them. And so that's a whole set of skills that are very marketable: statistics, economics, health, insights into how things are, critical thinking that is highly valued by employers, right? And a sense of community and a sense of freedom so that they become more confident. Yeah, with healthy habits, healthy set of friends, a sense of a sense of optimism, a sense of sort of belonging in their own skin. So away from all this fear porn stuff, right, which I think is highly detrimental to people's ability to sort of live a full life, right? To live in fear is a bit of a dull and sort of unimaginative life. It's much better to live in hope and in solutions, right? So that is what individuals get out of it. And we try to do that balancing act, right? But part of our motivation is, of course, selfish ourselves. We want to be part of an academic community where we're happy, where our own families are happy,
Yes.
and where my wife and kids are happy.
Mm-hmm.
That goes for a lot of the teachers at Nova Academia. They're sort of, regular Joes, if you like, within academia, and they've got their own families they're also doing this for. Right? So
Yes.
that's part of it. Part is societal need, and part is, of course, well, what do our youth need, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can society get out of them, but also what can they get out of this?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, really, really eloquently said. An interesting word you'd mentioned there is one is being confident and other being able to be well confident during uncertain times is always important. And that really is, from what I can tell, one of the benefits of academics is it gives an individual the tools to remain calm. It's a little bit of a departure from what we saw in the past few years. But which is an interesting point I really want to touch on there is the areas of economics and statistics. Because as
Yeah.
I get older and finishing off my time really in the liberal arts, I see that in the past number of years, for example, in Canada, during COVID there, our public health officials would come on TV each day and say that they had, from those who they had believed died that day of COVID, they were confirmed deaths and that there was no margin of error whatsoever to this, and that there was no interval or ratio that they could show the public there to in any way identify any uncertainty with the numbers. It was otherwise confirmed. And of course, even in my field, I wasn't all that aware that confirming is a strange way of doing it. It's kind of a departure from statistics, and it was very much many people were, of course, fearful. So it added to a level of heightened fear. But I was able to find that many statisticians remain calm, interestingly enough, at least at my university, and saying, well, there is a way here that we can look at the numbers that, number one, we can't say it's confirmed quite yet. There's a process to go along here. So I became very fascinated with seeing numbers and statistics and getting comfortable with basic quantitative analyses as a fundamental way of dealing with uncertain times. Can you speak as to a little bit about what perhaps in the past few years you saw, maybe if there was in any way a denigration of the basic principles of both economics and stats in the classroom setting, and how we can go about through your new academic institution learning the principles again and getting once again confident, at least for those who are entering stats for the first time.
Yes, we're very like-minded,
Mhm.
Sheldon, very like-minded. Um, well, I mean, economics has been sliding for a long, long time, right? It has sort of stopped teaching people to be very useful for society, which it sort of used to do a lot before the 1950s, and still teaches some useful bits, like, you can only spend the dollar once. That's a very useful insight, and that's an insight that every generation of economists, including the ones going through university now, are being taught. A lot of the other stuff is not very useful that we've been teaching in economics in the last decade. So in that sense, yes, we also want to rescue economics, right? But I think statistics is the more interesting area because I don't think statistics in that sense have been taught so poorly before the COVID era, right? I mean, good statisticians will have reminded their students that, look, there are no perfect definitions in social science. We're just doing our best, right? And we're trying to sort of measure things in the world in order to get some insights. And so to talk specifically about death, right? A good insight we got out of sort of measuring who dies and what were their characteristics over the last 100 years is that we found out via that smoking is not very healthy. And that was more or less accidentally discovered. It's just, oh, look, there are lots of people who are dying with, yellow teeth and sort of yellow fingers. And should we look at this more intensely? Geez, people who smoke, they seem to die 7 years younger than the rest. How is this possible? And that was in a time in the 50s and 60s in which, smoking was believed to be healthy because, well, you were smoking plants. And it was still recommended as kind of a health cure. And so data helped convince people, right? It's sort of, no, look at these deaths, look at these cancers. We really have more of them when people have been smoking. And that takes a lot of data to be gathered because, the moment of death, you don't know whether somebody has been a smoker. So you need to follow them longer. And so there's sort of then a point in following people for a long time and seeing, okay, do the smokers die younger, that sort of thing. So statistics have had their uses. We've really found out good things about statistics, which have helped our society become healthier. But there are difficulties with statistics, right? I've already mentioned that it's not so easy to actually define what death is, and it's actually measured in different ways, right? Because you may think that death just means that your heart is stopped and your brain no longer functions, but there's always an exception. And there's a famous exception of a bunch of young kids falling into ice lakes and their heart and brain stopped functioning. And, a whole day later or so, they were revived and lived happy lives. So it's kind of like, okay, it ain't so simple, right? It's almost like this machinery can break down, but can be restarted again. Well, what does this mean then? What is death then, right? It's difficult. It's difficult to measure. So different countries have different solutions to this. But there is an even bigger problem in health measurement, which is a cause of death. And that's what you alluded to, of sort of, it's COVID that does it. Well, if you see the body as an incredibly complex machinery, you don't have to. You can see it in more spiritual, religious terms to be richer than that. But if you see it as a machinery, well, then you can think of a car that breaks down. Is it really just the carburetor that broke down at the end, or more, this car is at the end of its life, and you can blame it on the tires, you can blame it on the engine, you can blame it on the electronics. It's all sort of breaking down. And then, of course, if somebody jumps up and down and says, oh, look, it's this tiny bit, we found a sliver of COVID in this person that may have still been in the body or could have been there weeks ago. And then, government jumps up and down to make you fearful about that. Well, that's abuse of statistics, right?
Yes.
And you will find that in different countries, the politics was different. So in a place like Canada and US, I believe that they wanted to have high numbers of COVID death because that sort of justified their positions. And so they encouraged hospitals to sort of claim that people died of COVID. I will give you a different country, Australia. In Australia, the authorities wanted to say we're doing so well in keeping COVID in, that they try to make it as difficult as possible to claim that anybody was a COVID death, right? And so in Australia, they were jumping up and down with low numbers of COVID deaths, right? And it's not really clear that the difference in what actually happened is all that big. But there, they skewed all the measurement of this supposed cause of death the exact opposite direction. Very few people died of COVID in Australia. And, the politicians are sort of very proud of that. The fact that lots of people died of lots of other things, and there's now high excess death. Well, they're trying to sort of swipe that under the carpet. But that tells you that, as it were, politics and human incentives, they come in with all statistics. As soon as something rides on it, as soon as something gets used, well, then it becomes interesting to abuse it. Abuse it. Right?
Yes.
And so that's what you're now seeing. But in a way, that's normal. In a way, that's what humans do all the time. We're always, as we're manipulating the supposed reality around us and the perceived reality towards others. We put up makeup to make ourselves look better, and we we talk better about our own partners, our own kids, and our own companies. So to a certain extent, we're all gilding the lily, as the Australians would say, right? But a reflective person must start to discount that, must start to, as it would, be aware of, okay, is this one of these situations where I should sort of think, okay, people have done a reasonable job on the data? Or is this one of those occasions whereby probably they're lying to me, maybe deliberately?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's a question of becoming mature, basically, right? It's sort of get comfortable with the fact that everybody manipulates perception a little bit. You know, we're all salesmen of ourselves and the things we love. But also that there is some real use out of data, right? It's not as if data has no purpose and no benefits in life. We can get stuff out of data, but you got to be careful. It's
Yes.
always a human endeavor to measure anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's I've really come to see it as a bit of, and same with economics as well, as a bit of a starting point. I mean, it's interesting in Canada, you can really graduate grade 12, as I did. I'll be the first to admit I did with very little understanding, although my mother and father are statisticians and an economist, and my sister's an economist now, but I left really with very little understanding of mathematics, and it's very challenging because then you go about building your own worldview and you get your own education, and it is really meant to, in any way, I think it's easy enough to have that reinforce your own world beliefs. But the beautiful thing about mathematics and statistics is that it really grounds an individual. It is an awfully relieving and freeing enlightenment, to get back to reality. It's quite relieving. And I know in the vision for the new liberalism, we speak often of our young generation, being adapted to social media, and seeing the things in almost an unachievable spectrum. I mean, we deal with everything is global. We have very little connection with the community, and it seems almost insurmountable, the challenges we have to deal with, and in a bit of a defeatist zone. But as we can understand the basics of numbers and what's going on around us, it is a very much a freeing process, at least what I've found. And so a bit of a plug there for your program in that sense, and but also, of course, with what I love and from what I've gathered of this academy, is that, of course, when we deal with these things, I know from myself being in more in the legal sense of things, we have to revert back to the initial cause. How are we reacting? And our reaction is writing policy or anything like that only has to be in relation to the initial cause, what's going on, and the severity of the cause. And so, what is so important is oftentimes you end up having to speak with people from different disciplines. You get in communications with them. And what really is interesting about your university, just that it is a bit smaller, is that it seems really the environment that's conducive to a free exchange of ideas. People are
Mhm.
feeling comfortable to, like you said, right? Here's your thoughts on death. Can be different, can change around a little bit. And so how important do you feel that simple exchange of ideas in a free, environment that one is able to make mistakes, learn from others with different backgrounds, is actually for seeing the larger picture of things?
I think it's crucial, right, John, and you must have some sort of emotional, yeah, strength in one, emotional security to sort of be able to see the world as it is, with all its ugliness and all its beauty at the same time, and to engage with that in a way that makes yourself happy, but also productive for the rest of society. And yes, you're quite right, right, or at least I agree, right, that having open conversations and sort of really pushing each other and sort of disagreeing, then coming to some sort of agreement or some sort of, agreeing to disagree
Mhm.
is very enriching once you get used to it, right? It's not the way our modern culture has gone. It's kind of like, look, my way or the highway, and anybody who disagrees with me, is a hater who must be silenced and cancelled. But that's not a happy way to live, right? Because, geez, how much of the world is truly going to agree with you? You're going to be a very unhappy person if you really, really need the rest of the world to agree with everything you think, right?
Mhm.
And so, yes, this kind of open, yeah, so, trust based on sort of mutual cooperation and sort of
Mhm.
mutual projects, right? Environment is very much something that we aim for. And there were, I mean, we clearly think very alike. And there were two sayings that I was reminded of whilst you were speaking. One is a saying by some businessman who said, look, that's right, if you think about the problems of the world and what you want to do, things overwhelm you. But start where you are,
Mhm.
do what you can, use what you have, right? I love that saying.
Yeah.
Start where you are, do what you can, use what you have, right? That's very pragmatic advice, and it's definitely what we're doing here, right?
Yes.
And there is a second thing. Matthias de Smet is exactly on your wavelength when it comes to this need to we'll be able to speak to with each other as human beings and sort of see each other's flaws and benefits, and as we are, and nevertheless have real conversations. So he talks about the art of it's a Dutch word, vrijmoedig, the art of sort of joyous freely talk to each other, right? And that can be trained. That can be trained. One can relearn that. But it is, of course, natural to us humans. I mean, we've got all this apparatus, a mouth and an Adam's apple and mimicry, which is all about verbal communication with each other. We're set up for sort of discussing with each other, debating with each other in order to mutually solve stuff. Right? We are very much group-oriented team solvers, if you like. Right? That's our evolutionary ancestry, and so that's our strength. And we should capitalize on that, right? And hence reject this notion of be atomized behind our computers. No, we live together in communities and figure out how that goes as well. Right? So part of this endeavor, Nova Academia, is also that we want a lot of the students to figure out, how are we going to live together in the modern world? Because it ain't so easy. What if everything is organized via Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram? How are you going to live together without all those constant distractions? Is there somewhere that you can organize yourself to, okay, have the good parts of that, but not the bad parts? Right? Same with AI, same with a lot of the other challenges, which are not anybody's fault, but these are the challenges of modern technology. How do you have a thriving community that is as it were not internet and social media addicted, but still is not, stuck away in an old monastery and rejecting the reality of modern technology? You can't do that either. And so part of the idea of Nova Academia is that this is a place where we're going to figure that out, right? Just so one is really building, as it were, communities of the future is our hope.
Yeah, really quite cool. And it's a fun thing, and we live in these historical times. We were chatting briefly about before the interview starts is, it seems in intervals and periods and times in history, we go through different eras, different ages. And we really have an opportunity in different ones as challenges arise to discuss and to present future plans that are a departure away from hardship, the challenges we just went through, learning from them. And so it's really just very inspiring what you're doing, and really quite cool. And just we had you had mentioned a couple of terms there that it's we I can't underestimate, I think, for students in Canada and of course around the world there, how much cancel culture played a role in our universities, and the idea that there is a general consensus, and that one being there proportional representation, to say five people believe in one thing and one believes in another, that the five are necessarily right is simply not historically accurate. We know that. And so having an environment in which we are able to work alongside each other and learn from each other, although we have different perspectives, is a really quite a beautiful thing as we go forward in creating this new era and learning from our mistakes. And so what's amazing is how many great academics are going to be involved in this academy. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention a couple of them. Of course, Gigi Foster will be involved there, Professor of Economics at University of New South Wales, Australia. Her research covers diverse fields, including education, social influence, corruption, lab experiments, behavioral economics. So I just popped up a little screen here. I got her information down because she's been doing phenomenal work, of course, for all those listening to check out the articles both her and Paul have co-authored on Brownstone. They're quite remarkable. Professor Nick Blismas and David McCorgan, and the list goes on. So uh, Doctor, is there anything else we can speak on and you'd like to have our viewers know about the Academy? We'll keep all the links, of course, in our description, and of course, we'll put some of your Brownstone Institute articles up as well, because I'm very much encouraging students to read those as well, as they're very insightful.
Well, thank you very much for the praise. Of course, I've been blatantly advertising for this whole interview. There's no other sort of links which you kindly allowed me to do. That's how I made the slide specifically for this interview. But I mean, I would encourage yourself and your direct organization to just come, right? Come for one of the boot camps and then stay for a year. I think this would be amazing, very, very good, very restorative for
Mhm.
both yourself, your immediate club there,
Yes.
and of course some of your listeners, right? And you might even have to get in early to make sure that there's enough spots for you.
Yes.
But I really think that that's exactly the kind of audience that we are thinking of. Um, but the other thing I guess I would like to say is that we really are going to make this a lot of fun, right?
Mhm.
So the nice thing about trying to sort of chart a way forward that's sort of workable is that you can sort of rethink almost anything, right? So one of the things I for instance would like to see at this academy, to tell you a part of my fantasies, right, is that somebody who's bright, who's very good at sort of artistic and making clothes figures out some kind of new clothes that we can wear there, right? And I think that'd be quite cool, right?
Mhm.
A kind of a Nova Academia clothing line, right? I think that'd be great, right? Now I can't do that. I'm not very artistically inclined. I've got two left hands and all that, so I would love that, right? And it's very much a place whereby we also want artists, we want musicians, we want the spiritual poetic side of life to be very strongly in this,
Mhm.
right? It's
Mhm.
really important. It nurtures us, right? I mean, there's part of it has to be this hard-nosed rationalist. How does the world go? How can we function? But that doesn't nourish us, right? We must also be uplifted, as it were, by the good things in life.
Yes.
So that's one thing. I also have another fantasy I don't mind sharing with your viewers, which is that one of my pet hates in economics and econometrics is the notion that anything is precise. Right?
Mhm.
Anything is precise. We don't live in a world in which anything is precise or in which anything is exact. That's not social science. There's no such thing as exact data in social science. There's no such thing as, well, what do you mean exactly? Right. And I'm always irritated by people saying that. So I would like at this castle there to be a bucket of soap at all times, whereby if there's a visiting foreign academic, right, who uses the words precise or exact, then I, as the academic director, are obliged to wash my mouth with soap, right? And so I get punished if they use those terms, right? And so he's not punished or she's not punished. No, I am punished, right? And so visibly, right? Okay, I've got another guest who sort of, has fallen for this myth of exactness. And I'm sorry for not having had a better choice of guests, if you like, right? Or at least we're trying to educate that guest by punishing ourselves at that moment. So
Yes.
that's one of my pet fantasies is things to do, right? So get away from this whole precision mythology.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. I think that brings a lot of humor and fun to the entire activity. And I had a professor who once said actually, one of my first classes I ever took in my undergrad and said, um, confidence is not knowing just what you know. Confidence is knowing what you don't know. And of course, most of what we know is actually what we're not certain of. It's very near impossible to be certain. So it very much opens up the door to have that free exchange of ideas, to feel confident and comfortable in admitting that we're getting close to it, but we don't know for certain. And it's a beautiful thing to, of course, then amalgamate different ideas and areas of study into our notions as we build them. But Doctor, thank you so much for your time. We're going to post all the links and everything in here. It's been just so wonderful chatting with you. Thank you for making the time this morning. It's been a real treat. So we look. I'll be applying, and I hope others will as well. So we look very forward to it.
Great to hear, Sheldon. And I think your organization has done a wonderful job in Canada. Very courageous, very needed. Right. So keep going.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the kind words, and we'll chat with you soon, hopefully.